This is Cold Start,
the F1 episode.
It's Formula One season, and for some people, that's a big celebration or a big event. For other people, it's, oh yeah, the really expensive series that runs those cars over in Europe is going on.
And it's going on at midnight, and I have to wake up super early or stay up super late to be able to catch the race live or avoid my friends for 12 hours so that no one spoils the race for me.
Hey, don't give me spoilers, man. I haven't watched the race yet.
Stay off social media.
Stay off social, for sure, yeah. Formula One is sort of considered to be the highest echelons of racing for various reasons. Maybe they're valid, maybe they're not. That's partly what we should be talking about. There's an interesting history to Formula One that we don't have to totally go into. I think that's a different conversation. But looking at where Formula One sort of stands in the landscape of motorsport today, why it's gotten popular, what's gotten it popular, what is about it that differentiates it from other types of racing or other forms of racing, even if that are similar to it, and then ultimately what to get out of it. Where are we now? What's going on with the current season? What would one hope to achieve by becoming a Formula One fan if they weren't? Or maybe there's valid reasons not to become one.
I feel like I'm a little bit of the redneck in the room here because I wouldn't say that I'm like the biggest F1 fan. I watch it. I know the names. I know the teams.
I didn't call you a redneck.
But, well, I'm a NASCAR fan. I feel like those are synonymous. If you're a redneck or a NASCAR fan.
I won't argue.
But yeah, for me growing up, that's just what I watched on TV and grew up in a family that NASCAR was on every Sunday. And that was what I grew up watching, and that's what I grew up loving. And so it took until my later years where I started surrounding myself with friends that were more into open wheel cars and Formula One to actually get into the series.
It's interesting because there are these cultural divides that separate types of motorsport. And it's not really for good reason. It just happens to be how things have gone over time. If you ask a fan of NASCAR or a fan of NHRA drag racing or a fan of Formula One or European Le Mans series, what they like about racing, they'll mostly say the same things, but they think of one another as these sort of foreign bodies. They don't even relate to each other in the same way because they think those cultural differences are so important. And at the end of the day, it's just people driving cars as fast as they can on a circuit to try to achieve first place result, be the fastest one around the track.
Yeah, and to kind of explain this for people that may not be big motorsport fans or they're just sports fans, so they're thinking about basketball, football, baseball, things like that. Within the realm of motorsports, F1 versus IndyCar versus IMSA versus NASCAR is the same thing as different sports. A lot of people just categorize motorsports as one big thing, but when you're a fan of NASCAR, you may not watch IndyCar or F1. Just because they're race cars going around a track, some people relate to one car more than another.
It's true. And I guess in other sports, there's generally one league where people who do that sport participate at the highest levels, right? Mm-hmm. There are some counterexamples to this, but not many. If you're doing football in the US, it's NFL. That's the big league. And there used to be multiple, but they joined together. And yeah, there are others that exist, but that's sort of the premier one. If you're looking at baseball, it's Major League Baseball in the US. There's one place to go to watch that or participate in that sport. In basketball, it's NBA. Now, if you look at motorsports, there's all these different flavors of it, but these different leagues, these different places where competition happens have such different character that they are effectively as different as soccer and baseball and football would be to each other.
And to kind of put a strong example of IndyCar versus Formula One, because I think those are the open wheel categories. I think if we compare Formula One to NASCAR, it'll be a little bit silly of how different those vehicles are. But for Americans, I think we're talking to an American audience, IndyCar is the American open wheel series. And Formula One is marketed as a world championship. It goes all across the world, where IndyCar is primarily located in North America. They might have a race in Canada, but they're predominantly racing in the United States. And an IndyCar, comparative to a Formula One car, drastically different cars. Even though they have this exposed tire and may be categorized both as open wheel vehicles, an IndyCar is almost like a stock car in the sense of they're all spec. They're all the same.
Right. They're all made by the same manufacturer. Today, that's Dallara. And there's actually two engines that you can have in an Indy car, a Honda or a Chevy engine. And those are your only choices. They're sealed engines. You can't tune the engine. You just use what's supplied by the supplier. Over in Formula One, you have teams they call constructors, which even sounds foreign to like IndyCar. They don't call the teams the constructors because they're not constructing. Right. They're managing and running and tuning a car. Who are the constructors in Formula One are responsible for the shape and build of the car itself, the chassis, as well as the engine that's inside. Now, there are several suppliers of Formula One engines, and those suppliers put engines in multiple teams' cars. So it's not like every team builds their own. But that is an aspect of that type of racing where tuning the car is not on as equal footing as an IndyCar, where the car and the package that you have delivered for your team is plus or minus the same, right? There's minor tunings that can be done with wing angles and suspension. But beyond that, it's a spec series. Everybody's driving the same kind of car, and it's really about who's fastest in that single type of car versus which car is fastest.
And for me as an individual, that makes me relate to IndyCar a little bit more than Formula One. Like on a weekend, I'm more going to tune into IndyCar than I am Formula One, just because the way that series is laid out, it puts the driver as the major factor, right? Now, if I was an engineer or if I was really into the construction of vehicles and developing the fastest race car possible with a little bit broader perspective of rules, I might be into F1 a little bit more. But for me, I think IndyCar is a little bit cooler than F1. It doesn't have the pizzazz and the wow that Formula One has, but it's cool in the sense that all the cars are pretty much identical.
Formula One has sort of achieved that prestige level because of, first of all, the amount of money that's being spent there to develop these cars and the engines and the technology, but also because so much of that has sort of created this trickle-down effect where what's become the racing premier level of technology eventually trickles down into what we see in performance cars and road cars versus having a single car, a single spec that might still be at the top of the game, really high technology type of a product for the engine and the chassis. But that level of competition to develop the faster, the better, the more overall robust package exists in Formula One, to your point, on the engineering level, on the construction level, on creating an overall car that can be driven by the drivers who they have on that team as fast as possible, right? So it's just a few more variables there to manage. And I think given the level of money that's spent on Formula One, they have the room to do that sort of innovation and bring new technologies to the fore, probably a lot more than what happens in IndyCar.
Yeah, F1 cars, they are the fastest of the fastest. Whenever you talk about a car putting down the quickest lap time at a track, you're talking about F1 cars. They're going to be faster than Indy cars. They're faster than the prototypes in GT racing, well faster than a NASCAR. I mean, NASCAR is not even on the spectrum here when we talk about lap times around a road course. So these F1 cars, that's what makes them exciting. They have always been the fastest vehicles on track throughout the years. And that is an interesting piece of the series, is that's where that technological development comes from, is how can we continually make these cars faster and faster and faster. Now, I know in the most recent years of the most recent development of the vehicle, the newest chassis that they've come out with, we've actually taken a step backwards in regards to speed, which, I mean, I think it loses an element of excitement for the series, but also brings in an additional piece of more racecraft. Slowing the vehicles down, I think the cars are a little bit more on top of each other the last couple years than they have in years previous. But typically when we talk about Formula One cars, it's pushing the limits of what human beings are capable of in handling G-forces and reaction times behind the wheel of a race car.
Yeah, by and large, they're considered to be the fastest vehicles. When you look at a lap track record, generally they're Formula One cars or Formula One races where those records have been set. And if you look at the history of innovation of these race cars, there have been successive generations of where Formula One cars sort of took these leaps forward from back in the 70s when turbos were first being introduced into cars, experimentation that was happening. I mean, for a while, there was this team that experimented with a 6-wheel vehicle in Formula One. They actually ran races with this. Downforce, ground effect, those were all innovations that came out of Formula One that eventually found their way into other types of motorsport and production cars as well. That's one area where I think Formula One has really led IndyCar and other series in yeah, there's a lot of money being spent, but they're using that to continue to try to find a faster and faster way to make the car go to a limit. And to your point, where efficiency, sustainability, environmental factors started to come to fore, there is a big show aspect also of Formula One. And I think there is a cognizant decision or a set of decisions being made around how to keep the racecraft exciting, how to keep races interesting to watch. And I think there was this period of time where things were sort of solidified. You had a few constructors that were really dominant for a long time. The cars weren't passing each other as much. The races were becoming a lot more disparate from the front of the pack to the back of the pack. So there were sort of intrusions made, perturbations were made in the design and the specs and the rules of the series to try to get a better racing result for the fans, for the people watching it, for the media product that they were ultimately creating, which was a Formula One race.
For me to say that I'm not that big of a Formula One fan, I will say that within the last couple years, I've gotten more and more into it. And I did not get into it because of Drive to Survive. I got into it because the product that they were producing on track was getting better. And I think in recent years, it's been a lot more exciting. You know, for me to turn on the TV and watch a race where you almost know who's going to win the race before it even starts, that's not exciting. Like, especially coming from NASCAR, I want to watch cars pass each other. And in NASCAR, there's tens of passes happening per lap in NASCAR comparative to F1, where back in the old days, you might have one or two overtakes in a race over the course of 50 laps. But nowadays, things have mixed up a little bit more. And I think especially this year, there's been so many shifts going on of drivers changing teams and, you know, manufacturers changing and all of these things that have added to, I think, a very exciting series or season this year in 2025.
Yeah, I think they've done a good job in sort of equalizing or reducing the fact of the differential of cars and manufacturers and the technology itself. Exactly to your point, with new blood being introduced, with new drivers coming into the series, yeah, it's exciting to see somebody who's at the top of their game dominating. But after a while, in any sport, in any activity, nobody continually wants to watch the same person over and over again do the same thing. It's not very exciting to watch. And at the end of the day, you know, motorsports exists so people can race each other. That's the primary goal. But in the current era, making a product out of that, making it consumable, something that people will be excited about and want to watch and then consume based on, that's a real aspect.
It's the same thing as why people hate the New York Yankees, is because they were just so successful. There's people that hated them just because that they were winning World Series, but that's why people develop hatred for them. And same thing was kind of happening in Formula One when you had Hamilton winning every single championship for years and years and years. And now Verstappen has taken over that position as like, just, you hate him because you just don't want to see him win again.
Right. And you had Schumacher before that. There's been these eras where certain drivers were just so dominant. And the question gets raised, well, is it the driver who was dominant or was it the car and the technology and that team that was dominant? That's a question that hasn't yet been answered because things have failed to be completely neutralized in the way that, for example, IndyCar has done by saying, this is the car, these are your two engine choices, now go out there and all drive together. That's something that has yet to be proven. But even despite that, I think Formula One has been able to create an exciting product, one that's bringing more people to want to watch.
For anyone that's thinking about getting into Formula One, I think you're introducing yourself at a pretty good time, because even in our last race that we just had, which was the Bahrain GP, you were seeing some cars, some teams that are usually at the bottom, that are forgotten about. And I'm talking about Williams and I'm talking about Alpine. And they're fighting for like mid-pack. There was such a good mixture in regards to drivers and vehicles throughout the field. Because typically when you watch an F1 race, you might have a battle within the top five, and the rest of it is just conga line.
Something exciting about Formula One this year has been the introduction of so many rookies into the mix in this 1 year. We've gotten like 5 or 6 new drivers, first time in Formula One, except for maybe some laps during a free practice or test time, who are in the series, and not only in the series, but competing. We're seeing rookies on par with guys who've been in the series for 5, 10, 15 years.
And these rookies, you'd expect them to be at the tail end of the field, but there was rookies that came in to pretty big name teams. namely Mercedes brought in a rookie, and he's been doing phenomenal. I mean, he's been battling it out with big names that have established themselves within the series over the last handful of years.
Yeah, that's Kimi Antonelli. He finished really well in Bahrain. He's finished well in a couple of races this year. The way by which people get into Formula One is fairly regimented. There is a ladder that gets climbed. We see Formula 3, Formula 2, Formula 1. There is this ladder by which the number of people able to compete for a seat diminishes over time. And so we're getting a test of some of these drivers before they have a chance to get to Formula 1. If you watch any Formula 2 or Formula 3 racing, it's really good racing, and it's actually closer to that spec racing like IndyCar in a lot of ways. The difference is the Formula 1 cars, they're bigger, they're faster, they have more controls on the steering wheel. One of the things that people have to learn how to do is just to manage all the dials and knobs on the steering wheel of a Formula 1 car while they're out on track driving. It's not just about holding onto the wheel and going as fast as you can, right? There's a lot of management that's going on there, and that adds to the strategy, but it also maybe could be argued takes a little bit away from the pure driving that's going on.
For me as a driver, I like to see where it's just a set car and it's whoever can drive it the best. So for me, I get lost in a little bit of the technology aspect of Formula One. That doesn't mean that it isn't cool because the cars can go so fast, but I would rather see the cars be maybe less technologically advanced, maybe less downforce, and a little bit more of a handful. And once again, that's my redneck mind talking of why I like NASCAR. NASCARs are terribly built race cars. They're safe, they're well built, but they're not built to be fast or perform well. They're built to be challenging. And that's why NASCARs on a road course is very exciting to watch, because the cars force the drivers to make mistakes. And when drivers make mistakes, that makes for good racing. If everyone does everything perfect all the time and the car rewards you for being perfect all the time, then everyone's just going to be in a conga line. No one's going to overtake. Yeah. The fastest car will be in the lead. The second fastest car will be in second, and so on and so forth. From the previous generation to the current generation Formula One car, I think they've done a good job in moving in the right direction. I'm glad that F1 made a step towards making the cars smaller. They're a little bit more maneuverable, and I think that they're more dynamic. They bring a different challenge. I think the length of the old vehicles created too much of a stable platform for the drivers. We're moving in that right direction.
People do see what's happening in an IndyCar and these other race series where we are racing closer to a spec, and we are seeing the benefit of having cars that are more closely matched than in the past, where there'd be one dominant constructor and a lot of other cars really spread out around the pack. So I think the direction of Formula One is going toward, we're keeping what we got because we have a pretty close set of races as it is, right? Using this turbo hybrid 1.6 liter engine, which if you think about it is crazy. Like in a street car, a 1.6 liter engine, you wouldn't think of as any kind of performance vehicle. Yet this is considered the highest technology, the fastest race cars in the world, among them anyway, using this power plant. I think what we'll see is changes to that formula in a way that doesn't necessarily differentiate the cars so much by manufacturer or even by race, but gives them the ability to tighten up the racing, shorten the wheelbase of the cars. Every several years, there's a new spec that's introduced to each of these race series. So they'll change the rules for the constructors or for the manufacturer to create the car that's necessary to go racing. And so we're coming up upon another one of those. I think it's been since 2016, we've been using the current formula of Formula One cars, this turbo hybrid with the small power plant and heavy downforce. In 2026, that's going to change, and it's going to evolve in a few different ways.
To be honest, I think they're doing a pretty good job at it. Like we were talking about the Bahrain race. I mean, you saw McLaren up front, and you saw Williams battling close to the top. And there was a good mixture of cars and manufacturers all the way through. And Formula One in recent years, I think, has been more changing in regards to like who's performing well and what teams are up front than it's ever been. Where the last couple of years, transitioning from Mercedes always being the winning manufacturer to then it was Red Bull for a little bit, and now we're seeing this big surgence of McLaren. But I think there's a good turn going on in Formula One, and it's exciting. Like if they can keep this up for the next 5 years, I think Formula One's going to be positioning themselves as maybe the most watched motorsports in America. I know it's the most watched motorsports in the world, but within that American market, I think more and more people are getting excited to watch Formula One than they are NASCAR.
Yeah, they've changed the dynamics in a way that I think allows people to relate to, maybe more Americans could relate to. Exactly as you said, this current race had 6 different manufacturers in the top 10. The prior race...
That's crazy. That is crazy in F1.
That is. The Japanese Grand Prix before that had 6 or 7 manufacturers in the top 10. That's different from what we saw in the past, where it would be team number 1 and 1 and 2, and team number 2 and 3 and 4, and team number 5 and 5 and 6. And it was sort of this processional of, we know what the order is going to be. Maybe there's some variation within the teams of who's going to be ahead, which of the 2 drivers for each team would be ahead. But that's been changing in a really good way. So I think that bodes well for the future of Formula One. We started to talk about the new regulations that are coming. Starting in 2026, we're going to see different rules driving what the cars look like. Those cars, they're going to be shorter, narrower cars. They're going to have less downforce than the current cars have. They're going to change the wing elements in the front and the rear of the car, again, to reduce downforce, to make those cars a little looser, a little bit more likely to slide, a little harder to drive, which I think increases the competitiveness of those cars. That goes beyond just, the fastest team is always the fastest.
Hey, look at the NASCAR fan having his finger on the pulse of what F1 needs in the next generation.
Wait, I'm looking for it. Oh, wait, there he is. Sorry about that. No, I think you're right about that, though. There are those aspects that we can learn from, and I think to Formula One's credit, they are learning from what happens in some of those other series. Yeah. I think it would really benefit NASCAR and IndyCar to kind of be looking at what Formula One is doing a bit more, and maybe they are, but to try to bring some of that approach and technology in to make for more exciting races that could then bring in more of that worldwide audience to what's largely an American or North American audience.
Yeah, no, in contrast, I would say that NASCAR over the last 5 years has made all of the wrong decisions in making their sport better. As a fan, I think there's been a big deterioration in regards to the show that NASCAR puts on. Every time they've added or changed something to the car, it's been in the wrong direction. So I'm glad to see Formula One has already been making good decisions to make their races more exciting and more competitive, but then 2, that the decisions that they're making for these 2026 cars are still movements in that direction, that they're still even not satisfied, that they want to make the show even more exciting.
Well, another thing that they're going to be doing, and this is sort of in line with Formula One as the technology driver in racing, they're going to introduce active aero in the front and the rear. So to date, we've had active aero in the rear by the name of this system called DRS. What DRS is, it's a drag reduction system. It's a system by which on certain parts of the track, under certain conditions, drivers are able to sort of push a button and drop one of the elements of their wing to reduce the amount of downforce they're getting so that they can actually have a faster speed. And this was introduced to increase the amount of passing that was happening, because at some racetracks, faster cars had such an advantage that no passing was happening. So DRS was introduced as a way that all of the cars would be able to gain this advantage under the right conditions so that they can make their car slightly faster for a short period of time to enable overtaking to take place. In IndyCar, they've had push to pass for several years now. So a similar type of approach, different technology. Instead of it changing a wing element, right, it was additional boost to the engine. It was literally a change in the way what combustion was occurring in the engine, or what was the actual technology happening behind that.
It's like a Fast and Furious NOS button.
It is kind of like more boost to the turbo or whatever you're doing in there, right? But so IndyCar has had that, and they've used that successfully as a way to increase the amount of passing that's occurring in races and be another sort of random variable that adds excitement to something that you're watching, right? Mm-hmm. If everything's just sort of processional and the faster people are in the front and the faster cars or faster teams are in the front all the time, the driver behind that first vehicle isn't going to have a chance because they're out in clean air. They don't have to deal with the fact that they're in a pack with a bunch of other drivers all competing. So now this push-to-pass system has really allowed other drivers to be able to compete in places they wouldn't be able to benefit the competition that's actually taking place.
Within open-wheel racing, those cars are so reliant upon their downforce that you were talking about the car out front has clean air and the car behind has dirty air. So when you're actually following close behind another high downforce car, the dirty air doesn't produce as much downforce as the clean air. So they call it aero wash is the terminology that they use in Formula One. And so that's why they developed the DRS and the push to pass in IndyCar, is that with these very lightweight aero sensitive vehicles, if you're the car that's in second, yes, you may have that draft that comes into play on the straightaway, but you're not going to be able to hang with that car in the corners, especially high speed or mid speed corners where you're going to have less downforce than the other person. That's why these series have to introduce this technology, whether it's DRS or push to pass, to help increase that competitive nature and racing that occurs in the race.
And, you could argue whether that's good or bad for pure racing in some ways, right? It should just be maybe the same kind of cars. Everybody's just duking it out under the same terms. But Formula One has seen the need to change what DRS is, to move away from the DRS program where it's only allowed on certain parts of the track under certain conditions, toward this active aero mode where there's going to be two different aero modes on the car. Mm-hmm. They're calling this X mode and Z mode. X mode is effectively like DRS today. It allows you to drop an element from the rear wing to allow higher speed, lower downforce to occur, to allow for better overtaking on straights. Then they're going to have this thing called Z mode, which is they don't just drop the element, but it actually changes the angle of the element on the wing so that it will provide increased downforce through cornering. So Formula One cars are already known to be wicked fast through the corners. With this additional technology, with the active aero that allows them to effectively increase the amount of downforce and grip that they have into corners, there's a new element that they're going to be able to introduce and potentially creates better overtaking through the corners as well.
So this new active aero system that they're going to be introducing in 2026, is that something that's going to be accessible to the drivers whenever? Like, are they going to be able to like hit buttons on their steering wheel to change the X or Z mode that they're in?
I don't really know if it's all of the time. Like DRS is only allowed for, it has to be after, I think, the second or third lap of the race. It's only when the following driver is within 1 second of the leading driver over which they want to use the DRS and try to overtake. Mm-hmm. I don't know what all the parameters are yet. Ultimately, I think the goal is to create more competitive races, to create more opportunities for cars to overtake, for it to be less of this sort of processional that occurs through the turns where, we know who's going to go fastest through the turns because their car setup is good for that day or for that racetrack. This allows there to be variability within a single race, within a single day at that same racetrack for multiple cars.
So it sounds like with this new technology, it almost elongates the quote-unquote DRS zone. Because currently the DRS zone is just on the straightaway, and after you get to the end of the straightaway, DRS deactivates, the wing flips back to its original position. But it almost seems like if they have the ability to create an increased downforce zone, that if a car is following another car, they might have the DRS advantage, the drag reduction advantage on the straightaway, and then the drag increase in the corner. So it almost elongates where this, quote, DRS or extra boost zone is going to occur for the F1 car.
Yeah, and from what I understand, there is still going to be a push-to-pass-like capability. So they're getting rid of what they're calling DRS, but they're going to have this manual override mode. There's these two systems, MGU-H and MGU-K, and I don't want to go so deep into all of this, but
you're confusing my NASCAR brain.
That's okay. There's two letters. There's H and K. So we're going to talk about K. That's the kinetic energy that's coming out of the car that's being effectively harnessed to allow the car to go faster. Not unlike a turbo. I know you could understand a turbo, man. Uh-huh. So a turbo takes the exhaust gases of the car and then uses that to spin a turbine that pushes air into the engine to increase the amount of cool air getting into the engine for combustion. Mm-hmm. This system is going to allow a push-to-pass-like capability in this manual override mode through this system on the car called the MGU-K, allowing them to gain additional boost. So it's really a combination of active aero and a push-to-pass-like capability that they're using to increase the competitiveness of races, to give more variability to who can pass whom and when.
Wow. So the next generation of F1, to me, seems like, for one, they're redesigning the car. So it's going to be a little bit shorter, a little bit narrower, less downforce. So we can kind of think they're taking a page out of NASCAR's book of, let's make these cars more difficult to drive, and that's going to make more exciting racing. And then on the element of, utilizing a push-to-pass DRS for a downforce car, they're almost taking a page out of IndyCar's book of, maybe we like that system a little bit better, reduce the moving parts with the DRS, let's just give them more power. So for me, as an American, if I'm a NASCAR IndyCar fan, 2026 sounds like a very exciting year for me to be like, well, if they're taking what NASCAR really should be doing with their cars and they're taking a page out of IndyCar's book, in theory, it should be the best of both worlds, and F1 is going to continue to be the most exciting form of motorsport.
I think you're right on it. The changes that are occurring are going to allow for better racing, using the technology to increase competitiveness out on the field, to tighten up those packs and allow a race to have more potential winners than they do today. There's probably about 5 or 6 names you'd expect to see on the top of that podium. And if it was somebody who wasn't that, it would be huge news. Right. So as much as they've increased the competitiveness of it over the last few years, there's still a fair bit of room to go. And I think these new developments should help to push it along that direction. Something else they're doing, and I think a lot of people are really excited about this, and let's talk about bringing some more American fans into the fold.
Yeah.
Formula One is introducing several new teams and power plant manufacturers into the mix in 2026, namely the Andretti Cadillac team is going to be a new team starting in Formula One in 2026. There will actually be 11 teams on the grid. There have been 10 for a really long time. Everybody's used to there being only 20 drivers on track. We're going to have 22, and we're going to have 11 teams out there now, including Andretti Cadillac. A totally different manufacturer making a different chassis, coming from a different point of view. Now, they are going to be partnered up with Ferrari for their engine supplier to begin, but we'll see how that develops over time. We have the Sauber team, who has taken on different forms over time, who have aligned with Audi, such that Audi is going to have Formula One teams starting in 2026. So what we know today as Kick Sauber, which I know some people want to do, but the team that's Stake is their advertiser. You see, it's the black and green cars, the Sauber team. They're going to become Audi. We have Red Bull, who is changing their engine supplier. So Red Bull's been so dominant in racing the last several years. They're going to start producing their own power plants, moving away from Honda to Red Bull power plants with Ford as their primary partner. So we have Cadillac and Ford coming into Formula One. Aston Martin is moving over to Honda, who's leaving Red Bull, and Honda were going to completely pull out of Formula One until they realized that was kind of a bad idea. It was serving them really well to be there. They were performing well. So Aston Martin has hitched their wagons to Honda. And then, of course, Toyota's been sort of kick around in the background all along as a partner to Haas, but not as an engine supplier or as a chassis provider. So it's curious to see what's going to happen there. But this is a lot of movement. We haven't seen this many new teams, this many changes in who provides engines for cars in, as far as I can remember, in my Formula One fandom, which is albeit new compared to a lot of people. But let's say since 2000, I don't think there's been this many changes in a season that I can think of.
No, and everything that you're talking about, it gets me excited. And like I said, like I'm a casual F1 fan. I'm really not that into it. But this year, I'll tell you, has gotten me more excited about what's going on in F1 and all of these changes and mix-up. And we now have such a variety in cars performing well. And then talking about what's coming in 2026, I mean, that also gets me really excited to continue to watch this year so that I know the storyline going into next year, because I think I'm more excited about the 2026 season than anything because all these changes that are coming into play. There's going to be changes to the car. Cadillac being involved in Formula One, to me, is very exciting.
It's huge.
I don't know why, but Cadillac in motorsports has always been a cool thing.
I think it's part of that idea of Formula One is considered this elevated form of motorsport, whether it is or isn't, whether we're being snobby about it or that's the reality of it just because the budgets have allowed it to be. Mm-hmm. Cadillac has been that to the Chevrolet brand. Yeah. Right? The Corvette was always known as the sports car, but then Cadillac would come out and put their body around something and people would say, there's a Corvette under the hood of that Cadillac. And people get really excited about that. Yeah. So now take that into the motorsports realm where we have Cadillac in hypercar competing in endurance racing and in Le Mans, and in IMSA as well. And we have that here now coming to Formula One. So I think that's partly what makes it so exciting. And you know, as Americans, to have a team that we can root for, to say like they're from our home turf, right. Yeah, you drive a BMW and I like Porsches and other kinds of cars too. But at the end of the day, we want to root for the home team. We wish there was
100%.
We wish there was a driver out there who'd be representing our country well or whatever it is. But we're excited to go root for these people from around the world. It feels more global in that way. Like we're participating in this activity that's bringing more and more people from different places, from different backgrounds together to try to compete at the highest levels of this thing that we've created. Yeah, bring more new teams into the fold, more new drivers, more new perspectives. to give us a good product, to make something that's so exciting to consume. There's been this series on Netflix called Drive to Survive, and it's brought a ton of new people and fans into Formula One who hadn't been really very interested in it or even knew what it was before. I can speak with a lot of friends who have gotten really excited about this form of racing because of a show that they watched on streaming. That's the reality of our world now. So again, being savvy, being aware of what's happening out there, these drivers are personalities. They're characters. They're celebrities. 5 years ago, Formula One drivers, almost all of them in the world, could walk around on the city streets of the United States and nobody would stop to ask them for their autograph. Nobody would even know who they are. And today, for good or bad, they're celebrities like Hollywood actors or anybody else. That level of success has occurred such that their achievements in motorsport now are more aware to the average layperson on the street. That phenomenon of Formula One's excitement in the way that it is in Europe and elsewhere in the world is now finally coming to North America. And I think that's a great development.
Formula One, out of any racing series, any sanctioning body, has done the best of actually listening to their fandom and understanding what can make their product better and actually putting that into place. And things are getting exciting. And talking about Cadillac getting involved, Formula One, you can kind of think about like the Olympics. It's this world series in a sense. And if we have an American team competing against these other countries, the Americans are going to root for the Americans. And I think for Formula One to actually accept Cadillac to come into the paddock is going to do a great deal in expanding their market into America. Now there's 3 American GPs. We haven't even talked about it, of the expansion in regards to America and Formula One, where COTA was the first F1 track that they built in America that was like permanent, right?
That's right.
And it was for Formula One. And now we've expanded into a Las Vegas Grand Prix and a Miami Grand Prix.
Right. Adding 2 effectively street circuits to the calendar, in addition to this purpose-built Formula One track that exists in Texas, right? Circuit of the Americas, COTA, which is a great facility for seeing Formula One. But we've now brought 2 additional venues here that brings out fans from around those places or people who want to travel to those places. It gives exposure to those places. It's only for good. I think as somebody myself, I didn't grow up with motorsport. My family was a baseball and basketball family. I didn't really learn to appreciate motorsports until well into my adult years. So when I dove in, I took a headfirst dive, and Formula One was the thing that lit me up because early on in my career of learning how to drive on a racetrack, I became exposed to these formula cars, and they looked foreign to me. I thought they all kind of looked the same. I didn't really know anything about them or how to appreciate one. I would look at them and just say race car. I didn't know what a cool looking one was versus a not cool looking one was. But by getting some experience in the Formula 3 level of driving a car on the track, it made me so excited to learn about what was it like further up that ladder. How was this sort of car, this open wheel, open cockpit, single-seater race car, what does it look like as that evolves to higher levels of power, higher levels of driving capability, driving it on different types of circuits around the world? So that made Formula One immediately relevant to me. And I know I'm an exception in that because a lot of people don't start out in formula racing these days. They've been doing a really good job of bringing people like me into the fold. And then you add to it this sort of gasoline that was Drive to Survive and programming like it, right? We've seen more movies coming out, more Hollywood productions. There's a big production coming out with Brad Pitt, a Formula One movie that's coming out later this year. More people are getting exposure to this so that that spectacle of what Formula One is able to create can resonate with even larger audiences than it had in the past.
A formula car to me just looks so foreign. It's very alien, right? There's not something I can directly relate to that. But I hate to admit, Formula One nowadays is doing a great job about bringing people like me that might be into other forms of motorsports, more so than F1, to be like, man, I really got to start paying attention to Formula One. They got some good stuff going on over there.
This is not sponsored by Formula One. This is a life I've been living for a while. When I first started doing Formula 3 racing, I got so excited by this, I started watching Formula 3 and Formula 2 and Formula 1 races. And it's the reason today I'm so excited about some of the young drivers coming up because I've been watching them climb the ranks. I've been seeing them hone their racecraft in these, what we might call junior leagues, where you would think the racing isn't as good. But honestly, it's closer racing. It's more exciting racing in some ways. And I think, again, Formula One is learning the benefits of what they're able to create at those junior levels and bringing that to Formula One today. It's part of the package, right? It's what makes it still pretty foreign from the cars that we know and see every day around, but it's something that people can start to relate to and get to know. They're also doing a really good job of outreach. Formula One show cars are starting to pop up in more and more places. People are having more opportunities to have these encounters, these experiences. More races in more cities means more opportunity to go see your heroes, go see people who are doing this stuff at the highest levels. It's cool and it's exciting.
I think this has been a light breeze of the topic and kind of our different perspectives of someone who may be a little bit more of a Formula One fan and me being more of a casual fan and a little bit more of a diehard NASCAR fan, and kind of our perspectives on this racing series. But if you guys want us to touch upon some of those other Formula One stories or do a little bit of a deeper dive into Formula One, let us know. If this episode does well and there's some comments about an excitement and wanting to know more about Formula One, let us know. We'd be happy to revisit this topic.
This became sort of a contrast and comparative analysis of motorsports today and what makes Formula One sort of so exciting among those other things. Where are areas where it has some shortcomings, but what are the things that are sort of propelling it forward as the pinnacle of motorsport, and without any shade to IndyCar or NASCAR or endurance racing in any form, why Formula One is continually looked at as sort of the top of the heap. And I think we'll continue to remain in that position for a good long time. I just hope, and I think I see evidence of, but I hope I see more of those other forms of motorsport sort of learning from what Formula One has done well and not well, and to benefit from that, whether that's outright copying it or taking influence from it or evolving in directions that are like it. We don't need Drive to Survive for every racing series that exists, but maybe there's something to be learned there. How do you make your product more accessible to more people? Motorsports shouldn't be such an elite thing, and I know Formula One is seen to be so elite. There's something there. There's something going on in Formula One that we want to learn more of and have more in the other forms of motorsports that we consume, and I'm excited about that. As a somewhat neophyte to motorsports racing, I've only been into this maybe for the past 10 years or so. Hopefully Formula One continues on this good path, and I would love to see the same things happening in these other motorsports racing leagues.
It's fascinating to see how well F1 has done to position themselves within the American market. If I was IndyCar or NASCAR, I'd be pretty concerned right now of F1 taking over some market share of American motorsport viewership. And if those series don't start to make some changes to find the demographic and find the eyes of American motorsport viewers, I think you're going to see a lot of people be converted over to Formula One. Not everyone, right? I think there's always going to be those simpletons that'll always stick with NASCAR because it's a little bit easier to understand. But F1 is coming into the American motorsport market with their elbows out. And I think they're doing an amazing job to grab people's attention. And, I've been walking into PacSuns and Hot Topics, and there's McLaren F1 t-shirts and jackets and stuff, and it's becoming part of American pop culture, which I've never seen that before, and I think it's a very interesting thing, and it's paving an interesting way within American motorsports, and hopefully F1 continues to prioritize the American market and we get more exciting stuff and more exciting races. Maybe we drop Las Vegas GP and grab something a little bit more interesting in the American market in regards to a racetrack and maybe even a permanent racetrack, but I'm excited for the future of F1 in America.
Awesome. Really fun conversation as always, Sylas. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Todd, and thanks for listening.